Thank you so much, Leanne Garens there with the World News. Right, let's bring in Bloomberg's Sandra Kilhoff now for our regular weekly deep dive into the UK property market. Sandra, this week you're joined by a very well-known name, actually, in British building, aren't you?
I am, Caroline. Thank you so much for that. Methods for UK house building have remained unchanged for decades. However, we're really at an inflection point when it comes to building. Tighter and greener building regulations have come into force, and we're still seeing continued issues regarding build quality as well as a serious lack of skilled labour. So really what we're looking at now is an industry that's being forced to innovate, according to my guest, who is former Crest Nicholson CEO Stephen Stone, who recently joined the board of Ilke Homes. Good morning, Stephen.
Good morning, Sandra. How are you this morning?
Good, thank you. In a moment, I want to get into the details of what it is we're seeing right now when it comes to construction, but I just want to get your take. Yesterday, we had a Bloomberg report about how we've seen a very dramatic drop in London home sales as of late. It's being blamed in part on how there are fewer international buyers and a lack of supply. As someone who really knows this market very well, what's your take on why sales in the capital are lagging?
Yeah, I think it's around not having a number of different tenures available in London. So the mayor's really been forced into doing a lot of high-rise development, which means apartments. Whereas, if you look outside of London, there's a lot more lower 2-3-story housing with gardens, which is really what a lot of families and young people are now looking for, is homes with space. So I think London needs to sort of broaden its search for housing and if you look at, there's a number of, for example, underground stations to the east of London in Redbridge, for example, where you've got central line stations. I know it's in the Green Belt, which is a sacrosanct issue for government, but really we ought to be optimising housing in and around transport hubs to make communication and travel particularly easy. I mean, particularly in the light of, air pollution, which we'll no doubt come on to a bit later. So it's given that variation and variety of housing tenures and scale in London, I think will help to expand the market.
But Stephen, to that point, I mean, building in green belts is hugely controversial, as you just said. I mean, there is a big problem in London with finding space for new builds, and that is why essentially a lot of it is high rises, because there are very few available plots, and it is extremely expensive to buy land. I mean, how do you really suggest that we can actually do this going forward? I mean, building, like you said, modular homes or homes with gardens, I mean, that just doesn't seem like a likely or feasible way, at least, to handle the issue of affordable housing in London.
Well, you have to, you have to look at housing in a broader sense and look at what's important, where it's important to deliver it, and whether you've got, they're not just transport infrastructure, but also, schools are very important, for example. So, and that's why I think we just need a radical geographic review of London's boundaries and look at scaling it up. It would be great, for example, to bring more, if rather than redevelop high-rise on a brownfield site in London, let's bring it back into a green space and then look at green spaces perhaps in the outer London areas and convert that into housing. So both mayors are actually looking at setting up almost a housing task force, and I'm sure there will be some of the subjects to look at. I do like the idea of swapping green spaces within the London confines. And then in terms of moving on, as you open the question onto modular, I mean, one of the attractions of modular, if you look at, well, there's a number of attractions really. If you look at most of the housing stock we've now got across the country, it's nearly all pre-war, the large majority of it. So new build is seen as a source of moving towards that journey to zero carbon. So building regulations for new homes change in 2022 to reduce carbon emissions, and then further in 2025. So modular gives you an opportunity to help contribute towards not just housing supply, but that journey towards zero carbon, if that makes sense.
Let me just dig into that, Stephen, because as a Dane, I have been consistently shocked at the lack of environmental efficiency in buildings here in the UK. I mean, most properties in Denmark, where I'm from, are rated A. Here, E-ratings for efficiency really seem to be is enough to fix. I mean, surely it's much wider than that. We have to really look at the construction of, as you said, pre-war, post-war buildings.
Agreed, and that's why the government are committed to. I mean, the government recognise that it's a huge task to the journey towards zero carbon for the existing housing stock, most of which is pre-war, is in that journey into 2050, whereas new build is being asked to contribute towards that from 2022 and particularly from 2025. So that's where modular, well, actually the whole of the new build market is moving towards that more energy efficient delivery between 22 and 2025. And modular is perhaps further ahead for a number of reasons. So if I just give you a few of those, firstly, because it's built in a factory, it's more, rather than traditionally constructed homes that are built in all weather conditions, whether it's raining or sunshine, you can be far more efficient with time, materials and labour. And waste is a very important thing on that green agenda. I remember when I was boss of Crest walking around the site, and often there would be 2 skip loads of construction waste just sitting in a skip outside of each house. Whereas now, when I walk around the ilke factory, there's hardly any waste at all because it's all designed efficiently with reductions in plasterboard waste, etc.
Okay, so if I can just interject, Stephen, I mean, I appreciate modular housing really is quite efficient, but it does feel like we are really at an inflection point for UK house builders in general right now. As you mentioned, there's this move towards net zero, and I mean, when you've got that and a skills crisis, you've got a sector that needs to modernise. Where does that leave house builders, not just like Ilke Homes, but in general? I mean, surely a lot of people have to innovate now.
Well, I think you'll find all of them are innovating. I mean, there's things going on where a lot of the traditional house builders are now really engaging with apprenticeship schemes to train a labour force. And, of course, in this post-COVID period where we're looking for creating new jobs and actually delivering more housing for the country, that's really important that the industry steps up to that agenda. But also, as I say, embracing the changes to the building regulations, which is the governance framework which all houses are built by, that's happening now. That's been lined up for delivery in 2022. What you've got is modular being a part of that journey to help deliver more energy efficient homes.
And as I mentioned, just for my final question, Stephen, I want to get your take on the lack of skills here in the UK. I mean, we're in a situation where the British population is upskilling. Brexit has made it harder to get skilled labour from abroad. So how do you approach that lack of skilled labour in housing right now? What is needed to fix it?
Well, there's 2 things happening. There's one, as I say to you, an apprenticeship training scheme. So the government are now putting a lot of money into apprenticeships, and most of the larger volume house builders are engaged in that agenda. So that's one thing. And then the second thing is bringing back to why I was keen on joining the ilke board, is modular gives you a chance to train and deliver more, not only energy efficient houses in homes, but you can train up a labour force much quicker because it's sheltered, it's in a nice warm environment, and health and safety is an important factor. So it's part of bringing mechanisation into delivery of homes. So if you went around the ilke factory, for example, you'd see a lot of manufacturing processes in place which help support manual labour. So you've got a combination of both, and I really think that's great innovation for the sector.
Thank you, Stephen. That was Stephen Stone, board member at Ilke Homes, joining me there on Property Portfolio. A fascinating conversation about modular housing and essentially where the construction market in the UK is at right now. Yeah. Bear in mind that you can hear much more from Property Portfolio by checking out our podcast page on Bloomberg.com. Roger.
Yeah, that was absolutely fascinating, not least the efficiencies that are necessary in modern house building. A really good insight there. Thanks so much for that, Sandra. Right, straight ahead on Bloomberg Daybreak Europe, Coinbase shares.